So this is test 6 from ScoreSmart, DSAT or DSAT 6. It's the one free test that they have available on their website. So if you go here, you can see that they advertise different packages, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tests that are available individually, or you can buy all 5 of them. This is not an advertisement. This is not an advertisement in any way, and in fact, we're going to see that I might actually have some critiques to offer, but those are just my opinions. The main thing here is to just use this as some additional practice on top of the digital SATs offered by the College Board themselves, or itself. Okay, so number 1. So words in context questions here. We had lost our way and we had lost all hope. There was no sign of the oasis we sought. No sign of any well nearby. The desert seemed cruel and blank, and I vowed that if we came through alive, I would not return again. And I'll just note that on the actual digital SAT, they're not going to they're not going to credit any texts on these words in context portions. They just write them themselves. So this is not 100% authentic. But anyway, cruel and what? So it needs to be something that means something like cruel. It needs to be a negative. Placid means peaceful, generous. I think you know what that means. You know, you're willing to give a lot. Merciless, that is a negative, and delightful is very positive. And so it's definitely going to be that. But our clue here is the word and. If it's one word and another word, that other word is going to mean something more or less similar to what the first word means. You're not going to have opposites when you have and. It was a cold and dreary night in London, and through the mist the lights of the inn blinked like great yellow eyes. Within the public room there was much jovial entertainment. It was well filled with guests, some drinking, others playing at dice, and a few eating belated suppers. It was an establishment much blank by men of fashion, and the assembly was of a less motley character than that of most public houses. And so, establishment visited. Patronized. Okay, so patronized as in, someone who is a customer could also be described as a patron, someone who visits it. So patronize can have a different meaning. It can mean basically to like talk down to someone. If you're being patronizing, you're sort of belittling them, or at least, again, not really respecting them. But it's definitely not avoided because they are visiting it. It's not obstructed. They're not getting in the way of other people visiting it. And I don't see how troubled could make a lot of sense here. So it's going to be visited. But again, these are not the most authentic questions because this is not the style of writing that they use on the words in context questions on the actual SAT. This is more like it here. So for the 225th anniversary of Mozart's death, Universal released a 200 CD box set. Wow, that's a lot of CDs. It sold an estimated 6,250 copies worldwide, and you don't need a hyphen there. But anyway, which, when multiplied by the number of discs per box, blank record sales of that year's Grammy Award-winning artists. And we don't actually know, but I guess the idea is that it, exceeded or surpassed. I don't think we have, we don't actually have the kind of hint that you would see on the actual test. It doesn't say anywhere in this passage that it sold more than the others, right? You can kind of maybe guess at it, but I'm going to say that on the actual test, they would give you a tangible clue because it could have fallen short of record sales of those Grammy-winning artists, but we can say here that it didn't stop the record sales or oppose them. And then what does it mean to capitulate? To capitulate is to sort of give in, to submit or to succumb, something like that. So it just doesn't make any sense here. So exceeded or surpassed, but again, I'm going to say not quite what you would see on the actual test, because there's always going to be a tangible or direct clue on these questions. Let's see about number 4. Paul Cézanne created approximately 2,000 compositions from his time as a student in the 1850s until his death in 1906. This, and I don't know why they used the French there, but this catalog forms a decades-long study in layering and blending graphite and watercolors, a technique he pioneered. Among his most blank is a collection of landscapes that are said to have been inspired by this and that. Okay. And celebrated works here is like famous paintings. Okay. Now we have to be careful that we don't just pick the one that has the same first word. Contemporaries would be other painters who were working at the same time, or other artists. It's going to be admired paintings. Celebrated, admired, appreciated. Cherished could have potentially worked, but properties doesn't work, because it's not about a property, it's about actual artwork. And then groundbreaking techniques, well, he might have used groundbreaking techniques, but this collection of landscapes or landscape paintings would not itself qualify as, techniques. They're paintings. Main purpose. And one thing that is authentic here is that the College Board does really seem to like Walt Whitman, and so they are using a Walt Whitman poem, which means it's not going to rhyme, and all the lines are going to go in totally different, lengths and have no rhythm, but we'll read it. This is thy hour, O soul, thy free, this is your hour, O soul, your free flight into the wordless. So a little bit odd, because wordless is generally would be an adjective, but here he's using it as a noun. Away from books, away from art, the day erased, the lesson done. Thee, or you, soul, emerging fully, silent gazing, pondering the themes you love best. Night, sleep, death, and the star. Okay, so basically the soul is sort of ascending, flying away from earthly concerns, from we could say mundane concerns or thoughts. So on these poetry questions, we want to be wary of the really literal answers. It describes the moment when one's mind drifts off into unconsciousness, embracing sleep. And I'm going to say that's a little bit too literal. And it might mention night and sleep, but he's talking about the soul, which is something a little more abstract. And so A is not going to be correct. How about that? It portrays the soul's ascent from the physical world into the spiritual realm, and a realm, arena, area, pondering these themes away from, the day, the books, art, etc. That is going to be correct. C, it doesn't denounce anything. To denounce is to sharply criticize something, and it doesn't compare art and literature to the soul. So again, be wary of those overly literal interpretations of literature, but especially poetry. Another main purpose poetry question. Now close the windows and hush all the fields. If the trees must, let them silently toss. No bird is singing now, and if there is, be it my loss. Not sure what that means. It will be long ere the marshes resume, and I'm going to say that means something like before. It will be long before the earliest bird. So close the windows and hear not the wind, but see all wind stirred. And so if you're imagining this and you live in a part of the world where there are seasons, you might be imagining something like fall. Why is that? Or fall, late fall, maybe early winter. Because it will be long before the earliest bird. That would be spring. But if you close the windows, that means it's getting cold. Hush the fields. That means no more farming or harvesting crops. There's some wind, but no birds. It's describing a change in seasons. It depicts elements of a seasonal transition. So what we see with answer choice B, it urges disengagement from the outside world. No. I think, again, that's our literal answer, close the windows. But if we read the rest of it, we see that it's not talking about that. And then C, it describes the act of that's especially literal, talking about closing the windows. And again, that's a literal reading of things that's not paying attention to the sort of symbolism or metaphor that is so typical in when we're dealing with poetry. The main purpose and tone. And that's not a prompt I've seen, but we'll deal with it. Rachel Carson is known as an influential conservationist who penned the compelling and inspirational book Silent Spring in 1962, in which Carson called out the detrimental and irreversible effects of pesticides. Carson's nature writing and conservation efforts are widely praised for advancing the environmental movement, which ultimately spurred the creation of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. So it's sort of introducing Rachel Carson and her accomplishments or influence. A is not quite right. It's not talking about the function of the EPA. It's not cautioning against anything, but it's celebrating, in other words, talking about the accomplishments of a well-known writer who was instrumental or influential in the progress of the environmental movement, but it's not trying to promote anything. The main idea. By the end of World War I, these people sought to infuse or sort of bring in more creativity, to infuse more creativity into the school experiences of Japanese children. Their plan was to implement, to sort of introduce or put into practice free drawing hours where children, and we shouldn't use where to talk about times, free drawing hours in which or when children could enjoy experimenting with drawing and vibrant colors. In pursuit of this goal, the pair invented a high viscosity crayon. And viscosity is related to this adjective that would describe things like, oil. Oil has more viscosity than water. Something that is it's like the thickness of a liquid, high viscosity crayon, the oil pastel. By combining these ingredients, they were able to produce a new, inexpensive, colorful, and easy-to-use artistic medium. As a result, emerging young artists were able to mimic the color and experience associated with the more expensive products commonly used in fine art. So, what are they doing here? They're talking about sort of the invention of the crayon, or this kind of crayon, the oil pastel, and how that enabled children to participate in art. That's too strong of a word. They didn't fight, and it's not really talking about educational policy. It's not talking about anything being thwarted or hindered or stopped. An affordable new art supply led to new creative opportunities for Japanese students. So, inexpensive, affordable, emerging young artists, Japanese students, experience, etc., creative opportunities. It does not say that, so our answer is going to be C. Main purpose. The following is from blah, 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 blah. Okay, the modern infrastructure necessary to realize or bring about the vision of a renewable-powered America remains unfunded. So a renewable-powered America would be, an America powered by renewable energy sources like solar and wind and such. This is partly due to the well-promoted misconception that the cost of renewable power exceeds that of coal power. Experts have long acknowledged that the levelized cost of electricity, that's not a word you see every day, and don't worry about it. It's a technical word. But for all U.S. energy sources, reveals that coal is more expensive than renewables. Moreover, coal's margin of defeat only grows once we account for the myriad or many hidden costs of coal production. Harm to public health, etc., etc. Any feasible or doable practical plan must involve provisions to assist coal workers in moving from dangerous, unhealthy jobs to safer, healthier jobs in renewable energy. Accordingly, we cite the urgent need for a generational investment, that's bad writing, in next generation renewable energy production, etc., etc. So they're urging or arguing for the use of renewable energy. So they're not. This is kind of the opposite. To curtail would be to reduce. So to reduce subsidies for coal power production. They would want that. They wouldn't want to oppose it. So that's not correct. To refute, that's a really strong word that you don't tend to see in correct answers. For reasons that we could talk about in another video, but that's not going to be correct. To urge support, how about that? Urge. To urge support, they got a typo in here. To urge support for the modernization of energy production through and blah, blah, blah. That's going to be correct. And infrastructure would basically just be, the equipment and technology and etc. needed to make this work. And it's not talking about workers themselves, so it's going to be C. Another main purpose poetry question. I don't think you would see this many main purpose poetry questions in one module on the actual test, but anyway. True love is founded in rocks of remembrance, in stones of forbearance and mortar of pain. And I think here is a good example of, what do you do if you don't know all of these words? Well, let's say that you know those two and you don't know this one. You can at least imagine that it's going to be some kind of material, maybe used in building things. Okay, and then the same thing here. If you know that remembrance and pain are sort of feelings, and you don't know what forbearance is, you could at least imagine that it's a kind of feeling. So true love is founded in or built on remembrance, pain, forbearance. It's based in these things. So it's kind of an extended metaphor in terms of like love. What is love based on? The workman, and so here we don't literally mean a construction worker, but continuing the metaphor, the workman lays wearily, tiredly, granite on granite, rock on rock, and bleeds for his castle amid sunshine and rain. So definitely talking about adversity. Love is not velvet, not all of it velvet, not all of it banners, not gold leaf alone. So it's saying, love is not easy. It is stern as the ages and old as religion, with patience its watchword and law for its throne. Okay, I don't know. I'm not going to summarize that, but it's a metaphor about the adversity involved in love. Not a series of grand gestures. Grand gestures would be like, giving someone a diamond ring or building a statue for them or something like that. And this is more like the opposite of that. It's rock on rock, brick by brick. Superficial construct would be something that is sort of, made up, and it's not really deep. It's only, I don't really. A superficial construct is kind of weird. It emphasizes the timeless romantic beauty of love. It's not really emphasizing the beauty. It stresses the enduring and challenging nature of true love. So challenging, not easy, full of adversity. What about enduring? It's old. It's old. And then it's built in, it has this foundation, this long-lasting foundation. Then this is another one that I glanced at it before. This is not something they're going to do on the actual SAT, because what they're asking here is you to pick one sentence. I mean, each of the answer choices here, corresponds. I know you can't see that whole sentence, but I'll scroll over. But, that's the first sentence of the passage. That's the second. Again, this is just not something, unless they're somehow doing it on the real test. They didn't do it in the Blue Book practice tests or anything like that, but we'll do it anyway. But again, this is kind of one of the potential, issues with using third-party tests. They're going to, they just vary in their quality and in their resemblance to the official test. Okay, so, but something that establishes the central claim here. So, I'm trying not to cover that stuff up. So, Francois so-and-so was a French craftsman credited with a number of innovations to the bow of stringed instruments. As such, as someone credited with these things, he is regarded as the most influential figure in the evolution of the modern bow. Some of his lasting contributions include the use of Brazil wood. This is not good writing in terms of parallel structure. The use of Brazil wood, designing bows with thicker ends, and the reliance on heat to bend the bow. I would say it would be better to do, using Brazil wood, designing bows with thicker ends, and relying on heat to bend the bow instead of shaping the wood. That would be better in terms of the parallel structure. Perhaps his most significant invention was a screw added to the nut of the bow that allowed the tension of the bow hair to be increased or relieved. So I don't really know how one is supposed to answer this question. The central claim. It would have to either be B or D. He's regarded as the most influential figure, but then it says perhaps his most significant invention was this. And so honestly, I don't think this is a great question because, first of all, again, it doesn't resemble any particular question. When they ask you for quotations, they give you new quotations to illustrate some claim that they sort of summarize. And so, again, I'm going to say it wouldn't be A. I guess we could say that the author's central claim is probably going to be D, because B is saying how he is regarded by others and some of his lasting conditions. So, I would say D, but again, I don't think it's a great question. And again, it just does not resemble what you're going to see on the actual test in terms of an actual question format. Data to complete the example. The marketing department of a major restaurant chain surveyed repeat customers in an effort to assess and evaluate their purchasing habits. Customers who ordered food multiple times over the span of the same month were asked to reflect on the extent to which they varied their choices, how much they varied their choices from one order to the next. The variability of customers' orders correlated with the number of orders they made per month. Well, if you're going to say that one thing correlates with another, I think it's implied that as one goes up, the other goes up. But yeah. And so the number of orders per month here, and the variability, the average number of menu items repeated. Yeah, see, this is the variability of their orders. See, I don't really agree that that's a correlation. Yeah, the numbers are both going up, but this is talking about the number of items repeated. So if they're repeating more orders, as opposed to including items only in a single order. Yeah, well, let's just look at these. Let's just look and see what we can eliminate. The more orders a customer made per month, the less likely they were to order a unique item from the menu. I think that's factually correct, but I don't know if it addresses the claim. The more orders a customer made per month, the more likely they were to order a unique item from the menu. We can at least eliminate that, because that's not true. The more orders a customer made per month, the less likely they were to reorder the same items from previous orders. I don't think that's true. I think that's the opposite. The more they were to repeat something. The more orders a customer made per month, the more likely they were to reorder some of the same items from previous orders. So I think that's correct. And then the question would be, which one of these supports the claim? And again, when I think correlation, I think positive. I think that's the implication. This, to me, seems like, I would say that's, if you're going to talk about variability, a negative correlation. So once again, I'm going to say you wouldn't be confronted with a question like this on the actual test. This is too ambiguous. But if I had to pick one, I would pick D over A. But again, buyer beware. Dealing with unofficial tests can be tricky. Which choice most effectively interprets data from the graph to complete the example? The technicians at the NOAA tracked the development of a newly discovered species of barnacle. Barnacle, you can look it up, but it's something that sticks to like a log or if this is water, a wooden pole in the water, these things that grow on it. Okay, the larva, baby, sort of, early developmental stage of a newborn barnacle was measured in a lab setting, and its mass in grams was recorded daily. After 18 days, 16, 17, 18 days, the barnacle transitioned from the larval stage to its adult stage. Researchers concluded that the barnacle... And so A is going to be incorrect because it's a small increase, but clearly it's measurable because it's increasing. They're measuring it. So that's not correct. Entered its benthic stage with approximately the same mass that it had on day 13, so 11, 12, 13. That looks pretty good. Experienced its greatest single-day increase in mass during the first week. That's definitely not correct because its greatest one happened in the second week. And it achieved its greatest recorded mass at the end of the third week. Well, we don't even see the end of the third week. But in any event, that would be the beginning of the third week, day 15. So this would have to be B. And so, continuing here, after a bit of an interruption, according to the information provided, which choice most logically completes the text? So, we'll zoom in. Aeroponics is the process of growing plants suspended in air without the use of soil or other growing medium. Instead, atomizers spray airborne roots with the moisture and nutrients they need. So kind of like a vaporizer, but one step further. So they're spraying little tiny particles. Fogponics, okay, is an evolution of aeroponics that relies on aerosolized nutrients. And let me change the color there. So aeroponics. And then fogponics, okay, created by ultrasonic vibrations, so very vibrations that are faster than the speed of sound to promote growth and sustain life. The droplets produced by this method are significantly smaller than the ones produced by traditional aeroponic atomizers. This reduced size means that the droplets can spread through the air more effectively and provide roots with nutrients without restricting their oxygen supply. As a result, well, fogponics would seem to be more effective than aeroponics. So let's just say, more advanced / effective. Something like that. So we'll notice here that there's nothing in the passage about soil-based or hydroponic alternatives, I don't think, right? It just says that it's another way of aeroponics is another way, and then fogponics is an advancement on that. While B might be true, it's not what the passage is focused on. C, on the other hand, is. It's making that comparison between fogponics and aeroponics. And hey, we're learning new words here. I've never heard the word fogponics before. Heard of hydroponic. Fogponic growing techniques are unable to produce the same as traditional. No, it's not saying that. So I would say that that's more like the opposite. And then the first two are more in the irrelevant category. C is the only one that is supported by the passage. And we're on to standard English conventions questions. So we can zoom in because we don't really need the prompt. A tribal citizen of the Cherokee Nation and Cherokee Bead blank. Berry, we don't know who Berry is, but that would be Martha Berry. Okay, so Martha Berry has played a pivotal role in the revival of the lost art of traditional Cherokee beadwork. Okay, so that's an independent clause. And then this portion here, we could call it a modifier. I mean, it's a phrase, but it's also, we could just call it a modifier because it's modifying or explaining, or not explaining, but describing this person, Martha Berry. And so we just want a comma there. So we do need punctuation, but the dash and the colon, well, if you're going to use a dash, a single dash, it's going to need to be preceded by an independent clause. Same thing is true of the colon. Another thing to note is that when you have two answer choices that only differ in that respect, They're probably both going to be wrong. The only time that one of them could be right would be if you did have another dash in the sentence and you were pairing the one in the answer choice with the one already in the sentence. But setting that aside, the colon and the dash are going to be much like the semicolon and the period, in that you could say, they're too close. You can't pick one over the other, so they must both be wrong. Now here's another thing that's not really what they would do on the real test. They don't tell you where the standard English conventions questions come from, and they usually don't take them from other sources. I think they just write them themselves. But anyway, happiness is the goal for which mankind is ever seeking, but of the many roads which the imagination traces as the surest and nearest to that desideratum. And that's just, that's not a word that you would be tested on, but it's like a factor that influences a decision. Okay, so few, perhaps none, ever chance upon the right one. Too many pursue a shadow instead of a substance, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so again, I think focusing on where we have our independent clauses is going to be important here, because this is a boundaries question. And so if we look at this portion here, we see that this is going to be an independent clause. Many pursue a shadow instead of a substance, or to use the word in the answer choice, too many. So too many people, basically. Too many people pursue a shadow instead of a substance. So it doesn't matter what this stuff means. That's an independent clause. And then before this lengthy portion here is certainly an independent clause, or there's certainly, there are multiple independent clauses here. But I'm going to focus on this. Few ever chance upon the right. That whole portion would be an independent clause. And there's another one at the beginning, but that's dealt with. Happiness is the goal, comma, but, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so the fact that we have two independent clauses here means that we need either a period or a semicolon. Yeah. They wouldn't do this on the real SAT. This would be acceptable. I'm imagining that they're going to have C as the correct answer. You need some punctuation and you need more than a comma, but they wouldn't make you choose between the semicolon and the dash. They would not make you choose between those two, because you can't really say that the dash is wrong there. But I'm going to say that C would still be their correct answer. But again, we're seeing the sort of the perils of using these third-party tests. They're just not realistic. I know I'm harping on that, but anyway, it's nonetheless true. But we'll continue to navigate our way through this. So, American writer Kurt Vonnegut, blah, blah, blah. He survived captivity as a POW. Okay, this is a boundaries question, so the meaning doesn't matter. I should say it doesn't matter, but the previous sentences don't matter. His novel, Slaughterhouse-Five, which they should italicize, touches on his personal experiences during World War II, but is not quite a memoir. Using dark comedy, satire, and science fiction. So they have a list here. So, using dark comedy, satire, and science fiction. Okay, so dark comedy is element 1 in our list. Satire is element 2. And science fiction is element 3. Now, this may be tiresome for me to do, but I want to make sure that we're not taking any sort of bad lessons from this. You would not need a comma there. They would not, on the College Board, want you to put a comma there. And the reason is that our subject here is basically Slaughterhouse-Five, It touches on his personal experiences, but is not quite a memoir. See, there's no comma needed there. Because both of these verbs, touches and is, connect back to the same subject. And so, again, they're not testing on that here, but it is something that you want to be aware of, because they have tested on that, at least on the paper SAT. Okay. Blank, 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 blank. Several species of these cacti, so the plural of cactus, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so what does this involve? Looking at the answer choices here, one thing that stands out is this portion. And that tells me that one factor here is the plural versus singular distinction. But since they're talking about several species, that means it has to be plural. And so we can go ahead and get rid of those two. Weird, got two shades of yellow going on there. Despite their misleading name. And then this could be thought of as a kind of modifier question. Their name is a term. Despite their misleading name, which is a term referring to several species, the prickly pear is unrelated. And yeah, this is another one where I'm going to say that this is, it's good, it's challenging, but it's hard to say why B is incorrect here. And I just don't think they would make you choose between these two options on the actual test. But A would be the correct answer because it clarifies that their name is a term. Yeah, I'd have to think about this to say why B is incorrect, but I'm just going to say that A is the correct answer. But again, I don't think you would have to make that choice on the actual test. It had been a simple request, a substitution of skim milk instead of cream, but the overt snub by the barista. Okay, so a snub is like a rude, sort of blunt action towards someone else. You're not paying attention to them, or you're turning down their request. So it left Yuri feeling frustrated, very confused, and dissatisfied. Very frustrated, confused, and very dissatisfied. Very confused, very frustrated, very confused, and very dissatisfied, or very frustrated, confused, and dissatisfied. So I keep critiquing the test. I'm going to do it again. This is not something they're testing. I mean, you could say that it's a kind of parallelism or parallel structure, and in which case and you could also say it has to do with economical wording, like reducing wordiness, but that's not something they're testing on the digital SAT. But our answer here would need to be D because the others are breaking the parallel structure. It's, in theory, you could say that Yuri was frustrated, very confused, and dissatisfied, or these other, but the most economical way of saying it would be very frustrated, confused, and dissatisfied. A boundaries question, and before looking at anything else, we can get rid of those two because those punctuation marks are equivalent. Baskets are the Indian women's poems, the shaping of them, her sculpture. Ugh. Well, it has to be C. That's a weird sentence. What we've got here is an independent clause up to and including the word poems, and then a phrase. But it's a weird kind of phrase where, I shouldn't say it's a weird phrase, but what's a little weird about it to me is that we've got these two different pronouns that are, the shaping of them, her, the Indian woman's sculpture. So, yeah, I think process of elimination here, because the shaping her sculpture, Yeah, that's not an independent clause. But again, if we remember that the semicolon and the period are equivalent, you get rid of those two, and then usually you're not going to have a semicolon followed by an and, unless you were somehow punctuating a complex list where the semicolons were separating the list items. But other than that, you're not going to need a conjunction after the semicolon, and so C would be correct. But that is a strange one. Transition word. So here we want to just focus on the original portion and think about how the sentences relate, and then that should lead us to the correct transition word. So after agreeing to officiate a friend's wedding, Ryan was disappointed to learn the ceremony had been scheduled on the same day probably, as our favorite music festival would be in town, leaving him with tickets he could no longer use. I was the first person he called when he realized he would have to sell the tickets. Okay. This is not a standard transition. Luckily? Fortunately. Okay, so it's not going to be previously, because that wouldn't make any sense here. He had tickets that he could no longer use. I could see how someone could potentially make an argument for coincidentally. It could be a coincidence, but I think from the speaker's perspective, it's more that it's just positive, fortunately. Arguably, you say that when you're making a point that is potentially controversial. So-and-so is arguably the best singer on the planet, or something like that. But I've never seen them use arguably on the College Board or SATs. And then again, if you had two that could potentially work, like B and D, well, they wouldn't do that to you either. There's always going to be one clear answer on these. Here they're going way out of order. Oh, no, they're not. We're on to the rhetorical synthesis questions. Okay, so with these, usually we can just focus on the actual stuff on this side of the page, meaning, look at the question and then the answer choices. So compare and contrast marsupial and mammal traits. Marsupials are a kind of mammal, so that's a little weird. Marsupial is like a kangaroo. As I say, other mammals. But that's not a contrast. Neither is that. It would have to be D. So the comparison would be the first part. All the same external characteristics, but they share no significant internal traits. I don't even know what they mean by that. What's an internal trait? I mean, and you have two lungs, a heart, a stomach. But setting that aside, this is the only one that attempts to make a comparison and contrast between marsupials and other mammals. I'm thinking about giving this test a grade, and I'm thinking C minus. Not that it's easy to make these tests, but still. How it evolved over time. That says how it was throughout his life. Evolved. That's again throughout his life. This is the only one that talks about an evolution. And again, on the actual test, you don't really need this portion because they don't give you inaccurate information relative to what's in the bullet points, or at least I've never seen them do that. So he perfected his craft with a new instrument that he invented. See, I don't think it says that he did that, so this would be D. The student wants to emphasize the impact of Katherine Johnson's skills during her career. So the impact. What impact did it have on others or other things, developments, etc.? Nope. That doesn't talk about the impact. That's just, she served her country, but that's not really specific about the impact. D. She used her expertise to perform the critical task critical to the formation of the space shuttle program. So that would be an impact. The other stuff is more just biography. So always focus on the, look for a key word here in the question stem. And here, keywords would be positive and negative. A looks decent. The first part is positive. I mean, is the second part negative? I mean, yeah, kind of. I mean, if you have an imbalance between males and females, that's a problem, potentially. But, well, let's just put a question mark beside A. Gains, that's a positive. Resources scarce, that's a negative, and I think that's a negative too. To forbade is the past tense of forbid. That's all negative. That's all positive. So A is not terrible, but B is more clear in terms of the positive and negative characteristics of that period. But again, I think you'd like to see a better distinction between correct and incorrect, or a clearer distinction than what you see there. The difficulty for cleanup crews in removing the molasses and restoring Boston, Massachusetts, after the Great Molasses Flood. So A is talking more about it's not about the cleanup, it's talking about what residents experienced after the cleanup. That left behind a mess, but that doesn't focus on the cleanup crew's experience. Several hundred Boston residents joined the cleanup crews. They labored for weeks. However, even with the aid of a fireboat, it would still take longer to wash away the syrupy mess that stretched. That would be the correct answer. And then that's talking about how they recognize them. So once again, we don't need that stuff over there on the left to get the right answer. Then our last one, a common thread. So a sort of a common theme that can be traced from the founding, the beginning, to the current day. That's only about the founding. That's just the first half decade. Since its conception over 60 years ago, it has successfully served over 60 countries with a continued focus on providing various forms. That's going to be correct. Yeah, so once again, founding through its modern, mission or incarnation or version. And so that's going to be C.